All right. Well, thank you, Sue, and thank you all for joining us today. We're going to focus particularly on getting a high stakes conversation off to a successful start so you've got a successful end result. Just briefly, I've worked for 20 years at Psychological Associates, a small consulting firm based in St. Louis that helps companies select and develop their leaders to help the organization drive optimal results. I moonlight as a magician, but don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with any tricks today. So we have 4 goals of our presentation today. The first goal is to talk about what works and what doesn't in a high stakes conversation. The second goal is to show you a tool to structure a successful interaction. The third tool would be to show you 4 key elements of having a good conversation. And the fourth goal would be to apply this to a conversation that you have upcoming. Okay, so let's see if I can sit down here and get my slides started. All right, so thanks to our sponsors today for Product Camp. Make sure to visit the exhibit hall if you haven't done so already. So the information today is drawn from mainly 2 sources. Our book, Leadership Through People Skills, and many workshops that we've done over the years where people bring in a challenging interaction that they've had. They role play it, we analyze it, and try to help them. And we find that oftentimes when conversations don't go well, it's because the opening was not good and it got off to a bad start. So that's what we're going to be sharing some information to help you on your openings today. What is meant by an opening and why is it important? I'm not just talking about, hi, Bob, how you doing?
Excuse me just a second, Jeff. Are you sharing your slides yet?
Yes. Oh.
We are not seeing them.
Oh, okay. My apologies.
That's
Thank
okay.
you for...
And also, if you could just adjust your camera just a bit, because we can't, that's better. We want to see more of your pretty face.
Well, that's certainly debatable. Okay, so I'm going to...
Okay, there, here, hold on. One second.
Let me get the slides
There
up.
they come.
Okay, let me...
And slideshow mode, presentation mode. Excellent. There they are. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my apologies. Thank you for pointing that out. Okay, so what's meant by an opening and why is it important? We're talking about more than just, hi, how you doing? Think of an opening for a conversation as like you're writing a blog post and the opening part of the blog post or an introduction in a paper. You want to engage the reader's interest, maybe tell them what you're going to cover, why they should spend their time with this. That's kind of what we're talking about as the scope of an opening. Why is an opening important? Well, you're laying the groundwork for a productive interaction. A poor opening can derail the conversation, and you only get one chance to get it off to a good start. And just as a poor opening can derail the conversation, a good opening can lay the groundwork for a very successful interaction. So when is it important to have a good opening? Well, it's not so important in low stakes interaction conversations. If you're just sharing some news, asking questions, you're having idle office banter, not so important there. But for higher stakes interactions, it's much more important. So if you're solving problems, if you're trying to resolve conflict, setting goals, coaching, giving feedback to somebody, then the opening is much more critical. So I'd like to try a little activity and ask you to think of an upcoming conversation where a good opening would be useful to you, and jot down a thought or two on what you might say to open the conversation. So I'm going to give you just a moment to do that. If you want to share anything in the chat, you're welcome to do so. Okay, so I'm going to just let you have a minute to think about that. If you cannot think of an upcoming conversation you've got, here's a scenario you can read and you can think about how would you respond to this. But if you've got one, that would be better. And don't worry about reading this. We'll give you about 20 more seconds. Okay. So hopefully you've got a thought or two. Now we're going to look at an interaction between two people, Ron and Keith. Ron is the leader of a team, and Keith is a member of the team that Ron is having some trouble with. He wants him to be more of a team player. So this goes for about a minute and a half, and I'd like you to watch how does Ron handle it, and what does he do that's effective, and what does he do that's not effective, and then we're going to talk about this.
Talk with me?
Hi, Keith. Come in. Thanks for meeting. I know this is a busy morning for you.
They all are?
End of the quarter rush, huh?
Right, but it's all under control.
Good. Aren't you changing offices next week?
Yes, that's right.
How do you think you'll like that?
Moving always takes up so much time, but I'm sure it'll work out fine. Is there something in particular you wanted to see me about?
Keith, as you know, the operating committee is eager to see what cost-cutting recommendations our task force comes up with. The thing is, although our team has had only 3 meetings, I don't think it's going too well.
I couldn't agree with you more. I try to do my part, but some of the others just sit on their hands and don't contribute.
Yeah, well, there's a reason for that. Whether you're aware of it or not, your behavior is having a negative effect on everyone else on the team. That's what I wanted to talk to you about.
I don't believe this. Those people sit back and don't say anything, and you think I'm to blame?
Well, if you'll let me explain.
Ron, I'm one of the best contributors to this group. I have lots of ideas. I come prepared. I can't believe I'm even remotely having a negative effect on other people.
I want to go over the situation and what has been happening at our meetings to see how to change things.
Well, I sure want to talk about it, because I want to set the record straight. I don't see how I'm to blame for the poor performance of the rest of them.
I want to talk about it and discuss how you can fix the problem so our team can get on with its work.
Wait a minute. Fix the problem? Shouldn't we make sure we agree on what problem there is?
Okay, Keith. Fix it, solve it, however you want to put it. Could you just stop exploding every time I make a point? That's part of it right there. Give me a chance. Here's my idea.
Okay. So I'd like to ask you a question or two. How effective do you feel Ron's opening was on a scale of 1 to 5? You can put your rating in the chat, 1 being horrible, 5 being great. Okay, good. Looks like we got a lot of 1s, a few 2s. Good. I would agree with you. What was ineffective about Ron's opening? Maybe you can put in the chat, what are some things that he did that were not good? So he started with blame. Okay, good. And that kind of got Keith, I think, on the defensive. Not a good tactic to start off a conversation. Confrontational from the beginning. Said your negative feedback. Okay, good. Attacked. Didn't soften the conversation. Okay, good. Some good observers we have here. So I'd like to show you a tool called the 5-step format for structuring a successful conversation. So the first step would be to open the dialogue effectively. Second would be to get the other person's viewpoint. The third would be to present your own views, ideally starting with where you agree with the other person and then areas of disagreement. The fourth step would be to resolve any disagreements. And sometimes there can be emotions that need to be vented and gotten out of the way before you can have a productive discussion to resolve them. And then finally, working out a final resolution. What we find is that some people don't go through all these steps. They'll do 1, 3, 5. They'll tell the person why we're having this meeting, what he needs to do, and exactly what he should do. So he doesn't get the other view at all. We researched about 100 videoed conversations, and we found that in most cases, the leader only asked 3 questions or less to get the other person's view. So either it wasn't done at all, or it was done superficially. you generally need to ask more questions than that to really understand where they're thinking. Another thing we see is that in working out a final resolution, ideally, the other person would take the lead on that because naturally they're going to be more committed if they're involved in deciding the action plan. Often we see the leader telling the other person what they want them to do, and they're not as committed. If you can master this in your challenging conversations, this is gold and will really get them off to really have them be successful. Given our limited time today, we're going to focus on step one of this process. How do you have a good opening so you get off to a good start? And we believe there are 4 elements to an effective opening based on what we've seen. First would be to appropriately sociable. Next, state the purpose of the meeting in a non-confrontive way. A third would be to state a benefit for the other person as to why they'd want to have this dialogue. And finally, to check their willingness to proceed. So let's take a look at each of these in a little more detail, and we'll refer back to the video we just saw and see how they did on this. So appropriate sociability. Obviously, sociability is not going to be the same for everybody. If you're talking with somebody who likes to talk about how the Cardinals did last night or what's going on in their kid's school, then you'll want to give it a little bit more time. On the other hand, if you have somebody like Keith in the video that wants to get down to business, then you want to keep it more brief. You may recall that Ron asked Keith a brief question, and Keith said he was busy, but that's par for the course. But then instead of stopping there, he went on and said, I hear you're changing offices next week. He said, yeah. He said, how do you like that? And then Keith got a little perturbed, like, did you call me in here for something? So his sociability was not appropriate to the person. You want to try to gear it to that, as effective leaders will tailor their approach to the individual. You may think, why be sociable at all? Why not just get right down to business? Because time is short. Well, sociability smooths the transition from what they are doing to having this conversation with you. It kind of builds a bridge to bring them into your world. It helps establish rapport before you get down to business. And if you don't have any sociability, it can be seen as curt or that you don't care about them. And you're trying to push them into a conversation before they're ready, especially if the people are more sociable. So let's take a look then at our second characteristic for an effective opening. And that would be stating the purpose of the meeting. Now, naturally, you'd want to generally have the purpose be succinct. And if it's an important meeting you're having, you may even want to plan out basically what you're going to say as your purpose statement in advance. But I think the key thing here that several of you mentioned is that you don't want to be accusatory. If your meeting involves giving some negative feedback to the other person or constructive feedback, you don't want to put them on the defensive right off the bat. Because after all, the goal is to have a productive give and take discussion, and they're not going to want to do that if they have to defend themselves right away. As we saw, Ron stated his purpose, that the purpose is to solve the problems that you've been creating, or to talk about how you've been hurting the team. And he got upset, and they were not off to a good start. A good tool to use in this is a first-person statement. So generally, if you have positive things to say about the other person, you'd want to use you and attribute it to them, give them credit. But if it's negative things, you want to couch it more in terms of I, and you talk more about your reaction to it or how it makes you feel, the consequences of it. So a first-person statement, you want to do a few things. You want to describe the other person's behavior, your feelings or your reaction to it, the adverse consequences the behavior is causing, and then ask for their help in resolving the issue. So let's look at what this might look like. Instead of your department is getting its reports out late, kind of putting them on the defensive, you might try something like, I'm worried about your department running behind in its reports. I'm afraid it's going to cause delivery problems. What can we do to solve this? You state the issue, that you're concerned about it, the effect it's having, and you ask for their help. Another quick example, instead of "you let me down," something along the lines of, "We have a quota in place. I'm disappointed that we're behind because I gave it to 2 department heads who base their forecasts on it. How can we get things back on track?" So first person statements, a good technique if you've got a challenging purpose statement to help you be successful in that and not put the person on the defensive. Let's look at the third element of a successful opening, and that would be stating a benefit. What's in it for them to have this conversation with you? So doing this will raise their receptivity to want to have the dialogue. It motivates them to take this journey with you. And maybe most importantly, it addresses their needs and not just yours. You know, clearly you want to have this discussion right now, but do they? Well, who knows? Maybe they're preoccupied with a deadline that they've got and they're not really focused on having this. Or maybe they're worried that they're going to get in trouble and they're apprehensive about it. Or maybe they've got a family situation and they're worried about their kid's surgery in a few days. So stating a benefit can just help them see what's in it for them and want to participate. So let's look at some example benefit statements. You might say, here's an opportunity to put a lot of your ideas to work. You'll have plenty of freedom to do things your way. Or once the software is up and running, management is sure to be impressed by the fact that your years of experience have really paid off. Or you'll have to work with a large group of people from inside as well as outside the company. So something to motivate them to get them to want to participate. We find that this is done very seldom, and it can really help motivate them to want to discourse with you and have a successful interaction. The final of the 4 elements in a successful opening is checking willingness to proceed. Have you ever had somebody call you and they just start right in? Maybe they're trying to sell you something, and you're not really interested, but they're just plowing ahead with the pitch anyway. Or maybe your spouse wants to talk to you about something and their day and your mind's not really on it. You're not really receptive to it, but they're continuing anyway. All right, so this is an important concept called receptivity. Is other person's receptivity high to having this discussion, or is it low? You want to assess what their receptivity is. And if it's high, then great, you can continue on to the next step in the conversation, ideally getting their views, and have a good discussion. If, on the other hand, it's low, you don't want to just plow right through. You want to try to spin it up. So how do you assess their receptivity and how do you spin it up if it's low? Well, high receptivity would look like they're willing to proceed, they're engaged, they're inquisitive, they seem open-minded to having a give and take discussion. On the other hand, low receptivity can look like many different things. If they want to get things over quickly, that's an indication they may be preoccupied, not really into having this. They're not listening. Maybe they're making overgeneralizations, flat assertions, or expressing hostility, anger, like Keith was in the video, hesitancy, maybe they're worried. So you want to address this if there's low receptivity and try to spin it up rather than just plowing right through and ignoring that. How do you spin up receptivity? To give a thorough answer, that would take longer than we've got today, but in brief, you want to probe the concerns that they expressed and see what's going on, what's making you angry. You seem angry. What's your concern? And then address what their concerns are. And once you've done that, then you can take another run and check their willingness to proceed. Socrates, I should say, if advice given at high receptivity is solicited, but given at low receptivity is perceived as unsolicited advice. And Socrates gave a lot of unsolicited advice and he was poisoned. So don't make that same mistake yourself. We want you to be around. So we've kind of covered the 4 key areas to having a good opening. And Ron has gone to school and he's learned this, and let's watch how he does now and see what he does different.
Ron, you wanted to talk with me?
Oh, hi, Keith. Come in. Why don't we sit over here?
Okay, so I'm going to interrupt this a little bit, but just pointing out, what did he do differently there? Instead of him staying behind the desk, he invited him over to his conference table where it's a little bit more collaborative.
Thanks for meeting. I know this is a busy morning for you.
Well, they all are.
I imagine so. The end of the quarter.
Right, but it's all under control.
That's good. Keith,
Okay, so there you notice he was more appropriate in his sociability. Keith's behavior was that he didn't seem in a chit-chatty mood. So after a brief sociability, Ron's getting down to business. As before, where he asked a couple more questions. He's being more appropriate here with his sociability.
as you know, the operating committee is looking forward to seeing what cost-cutting recommendations our task force comes up with.
Mhm.
With your experience and background, you're a key player in helping make sure we get really significant results.
Okay, so what did he do there? He made a benefit statement. He told Keith that his experience is valued and that with his help, the committee can significantly have an impact on the company.
Having said that, I have a concern.
What's that?
How you interact with a team.
What are you talking about? I do more than my share to achieve our objectives.
How so?
Okay, so he was starting to state his sense of purpose, his purpose statement, and assessing Keith's receptivity, and Keith got angry. In the first interaction, you notice he didn't really regard that. He just plowed right on. But here he's asked, how so? So he's trying to understand his concerns and deal with them, and then he's going to take another run at seeing if he's receptive to continue.
Come prepared with ideas. I take an active part in discussion. The others are more laid back. They just sit on their hands and aren't involved.
They're reluctant to participate.
That's right.
How about we discuss that in more detail?
Well, I've told you what the problem is. Why do
Okay, so again, he made another statement of purpose. Let's discuss this in detail. He's checking his receptivity to proceed, but he's still argumentative. So that's all right. He's going to address it again.
don't you talk with the people who are responsible?
I think it's important that we discuss it. I would like to use our previous meetings, especially last Tuesday's, as a frame of reference.
Oh, I see where this is coming from. This is about the argument Tim and I had. Ron, you have to understand, Tim is a dreamer. He doesn't have a clue about the real cost of sales in this company. I don't think you should take one incident and make a big deal out of it.
You're aggravated that I'm blowing this out of proportion.
Yeah, it really bothers me that I'm somehow responsible for the team's performance when I'm trying to set the standard. I know our work is being carefully watched. I'm not going to sit by and let some superficial analysis slide through.
Keith, I'm not sure what to do. I'm watching the meeting slip into a pattern that's not productive. Help me out here.
Okay, so there he kind of made a first person statement, right? He had tried a couple of things. Keith was still being difficult. So he's explained what he'd like to do, and he's asked for Keith's help.
Doing what?
By looking at our meetings to see what's going on. Then we can figure out how to make them more effective so the recommendations we make will really count.
Okay, so he's given him another benefit statement of what's in it for him to have this conversation. They can look at the team behavior and help them be more successful.
Want to talk? Okay, let's talk.
Okay, so anyway, that's essentially the end of step one. But hopefully that while it's not maybe the most ideal thing to illustrate these things, it's shown a difference between more effective using of these 4 techniques and ineffective. So at this point, I'd like to ask you to return at the beginning. We talked about an opening for a conversation that you have upcoming. What have you learned that you might be able to apply today? Maybe you can put that in the chat. So we've talked about being appropriately sociable, catering your sociability to the other person's behavior, stating a statement of purpose that doesn't offend the other person, having a benefit for them to engage in the dialogue with you, and then checking to see if they're receptive before you just plow forward. So good. So Lori says the idea of a benefit statement would be helpful. And Yuting says structuring the conversation. Okay, good. It's a 5-step format. Okay, very well. All right then. Well, before we open for questions, I'll just say if I appreciate the chance to share these ideas with you. If you like this kind of stuff and you want to learn more, each month we put out a free newsletter and we talk about leadership tips and webinars that we've got. You're welcome to subscribe at our website. If you not only want to learn about this stuff, but you want to put this into action, you could check out more information on workshops. So I'm open to any questions. If you have any, feel free to unmute yourself and say them or put them in the chat, whatever you would like.
I saw a couple in the chat, Jeff. Someone asked about, can you give an example of flat assertions?
Yes, a flat assertion.
Assertion, sorry.
Yeah, it'd be like all of our widgets are unprofitable, or nobody's ever interested in our workshops. Just making an overly generalization when maybe actually there are some people that are interested in the workshops, just some aren't, but some are. So just a flat assertion, an overgeneralization.
Okay. And another one similar is, how would you deal with logic bullies? Someone who would argue or debate you on 1,001 things.
Oh boy, that's a tough one. I would try to understand things from their perspective, state the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish. And it sounds like this might be a situation where they disagree with you. So you would try to understand their perspective, maybe summarize what they're saying to let them know that you've heard it, and give them an opportunity to amend it if you didn't hear it right. And then just try to clarify where you agree, where you disagree, and see if you can resolve it. That's a longer answer probably than I'm able to give there, but hopefully that's of some help.
Did you see Diane Bowman said, can you speak to when there may be a need for mediation by another objective person?
A need for mediation, yes. Yeah, if you really have a tough one, then you may have to do that. And similarly, if you may have a situation where the person is having a medical procedure tomorrow and they're just not in a good frame of mind to have this conversation. And in something like that, it's perfectly appropriate to delay it until a week later when they're in a better frame of mind to have it. So yeah, but hopefully you can use good techniques to where you don't need a mediator, but that certainly would be a last resort option if the two of you cannot resolve it effectively. Let's see. Any other questions that you're seeing, Sue?
Would you address concerns for topics that, so checking receptivity and addressing concerns, one of the learning points you had, would you address concerns for topics that might not be related to what you wanted to talk about?
So can you say that again? I'm not sure I understand what that's asking.
So the one of the learning points that you had was checking receptivity and addressing concerns. But what if there's other concerns for topics that might not be related to what you were going to talk about?
I see. Well, I think then you have to make a judgment call are these concerns things that need to be talked about now to get them, past that, to be able to have this discussion? Or you might ask them, you've got some concerns here. Do you want to address these now? Would that be helpful? Or should we talk about those in a future conversation, but stay with today's agenda? So I think you kind of need to make a call, and you might ask the other person for their feedback on that.
Okay. And then there's one more here. How to deal with a situation where you want to initiate change and the other party does not think change is needed. Sounded like the videos that you showed, doesn't it?
Yes. So, okay. So how do you deal with where there's a disagreement there? You want to initiate change and they don't think change is needed. So you'd state your purpose and you check their receptivity to continue. And if they're not receptive, you would see what their concerns are. And then you'd ask for their thoughts on why do they not feel change is needed. And you might probe what they're saying so you can kind of peel the onion back a little bit and understand it from their viewpoint. You want to be empathetic to them, put yourself in their shoes. Then you'd want to go to step 3 and point out where you agree with them. If there are any areas of agreement, often there are, right? And that kind of helps show a connection that there's some agreement, but then point out areas where you have a difference of opinion and explain where you differ and why. And then you'd want to resolve them, and probably you'd want to take them one at a time. If there's 2, 3 areas where you mainly disagree, focus on each of them and explore the other person's viewpoint, state the area of disagreement. You'd explore the other person's views a little more depth, explain yours, see if you can come to a resolution on them that you can both buy into. So not an easy thing, but hopefully that provides some help with it. I don't mean to be salesy here, but the book is 200 pages and it goes into a lot more depth on a lot of these things, the 5 steps in the format, and how do you deal with different types of behaviors that you see differently. You might look for that on Amazon, Leadership Through People Skills, and it might help address this in more time than I'm able to today.
And speaking of time, time is just about up because we need a 5-minute transition. I'll answer. Someone said, where can I watch this talk? We're recording it on YouTube. They're also recording the entire thing, and it will be shared with everyone who has participated. That'll be coming from Product Camp Online. We'll go to everyone. But Jeff, thank you so much. This was a very interesting and appropriate talk. So thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening.